all start at the beginning. Why did you first come to report about Roger Rogerson? I mean, how?
It was certainly not by design, completely by accident. And you've mentioned a couple of places that I worked, 60 Minutes, the Sydney Morning Herald, Four Corners. My introduction to crime writing came from a slightly less auspicious journal called Truth, which was originally based in Melbourne. In 1981, two of Rupert Murdoch's editors bought it off him, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, they ended up owning...
He gave it away.
He might have given it away. Rupert wanted to improve his image. And they decided to start a Sydney version of Truth, which was a scandal sheet, but it did have a fantastic form guide, in my defence. And of course, mainly showbiz, gossip, but also a bit of crime. You know, based in Melbourne, painters and dockers, they had a bit of a rich history there. So in 1981, I'm working for Truth. The offices are in Broadway, just near Glebe Point Road, just up from the Broadway Hotel, which, as I later discovered many years, plays a bit of a part in this saga. On June 27, 1981, Roger Rogerson walks into a lane in Chippendale, Dungar Place, and meets with Warren Lanfranchi, who is about 23 years old. He's a heroin dealer, amongst other things. Roger shoots him dead, 2 shots, one in the neck and one through the heart. Falls down dead in the gutter. I think it says something about Roger's personality and his confidence that within minutes of that shooting happening, and with Lanfranchi still lying there, he gives an interview to the Sunday Telegraph. And the next day it is along the lines of, it was high noon. It was high noon in the high noon Hollywood movie, Gary Cooper, the sheriff cleaning up the mean streets of Sydney. It actually included the line, yesterday he walked those streets alone. Well, not quite, because there are 18 other police around him. But Roger played to this, and it appears it was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, I've never heard of anything like it before. So about a week or so later, Sally Ann Huckstep, Warren Lanfranchi's girlfriend, goes on 60 Minutes, makes explosive allegations. Warren went there to meet Roger.
Taken there by Neddy Smith.
Driven there by, well, G, as he was known at that stage. He was given a pseudonym because he was a police informant. So we didn't know who Neddy Smith was early on, but it was Ned. He drove him. He drove him there. Ned Smith is the person who drives him to his death. So Roger does the interview with the Sunday Telegraph, Sally Ann Huckstep does the 60 Minutes, and one of the editors at Truth says, mate, this is a bloody good yarn. Why don't you go around and see the old man, Keith Lanfranchi, Warren's dad, who lived, luckily, it was within walking distance, Salisbury Road, Camperdown, so no need for any expenses. So one weeknight, about 7 or 8 o'clock, I toddle off to see Keith, whom I've obviously never met. This is my first... I've never done a crime story before.
You were doing state politics and covering the local council.
Federal politics. I was the civic reporter for the Daily Telegraph, I'll have you know, covering the Sydney City Council, and I'd spent a couple of years in Parliament House for the Sydney Morning Herald, doing Aboriginal affairs, environment and communications, amongst other things.
But not crime.
Not crime, no. No interest in crime at that stage. So I go to see Keith, because he hasn't really spoken. And there's just the two of us. It's a little semi-detached. We're in his living room, and it's obviously night time. It's June, maybe early July. It's dark, it's quite cold. And we're chatting away, and it's going well. Keith's telling me some stuff, and all of a sudden a dog starts barking in his backyard. And he just sort of pauses and looks at me and says, "Don't be alarmed." He reaches under the cushion on the couch and pulls out a Magnum 357 revolver, which for those who might not know it, it's Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood. Long barreled, not short barreled. Not that I know my guns, but he says, I'll be back in a minute. He goes to the backyard, dog stops barking. Comes back, said, it's all okay, and he obviously sees me looking at the gun and says, it's okay, I've got a licence. I'm going, oh, that's good. Terrific, no problem. He says, I'm actually a licensed pistol dealer, and I can't remember whether then or later he showed me his bat cave, which had like 20 or 30 handguns on a wall, and it was very professionally secured, and so on. Anyway, Keith tells me about the weeks leading up to his son's death on June 27, 1981. He says that Warren has been shot in cold blood. He says that Warren was shot because he had ripped off one of Rogerson's heroin dealers about 3 weeks before he was shot, so early June, first week of June. He says the gun that his son was found with is a piece of old rubbish. It's the name of the revolver is a Harrington and Richardson. Keith told me in that interview that night it was about 40 years old, could have been 80 years old. It was faulty. And Keith also tells me that there are witnesses who say the shots that killed his son were not fired in quick succession, as the Sunday Telegraph had reported, but were 12 to 13 seconds apart. So we report all this in the Truth on, I think it was July 11, so it's roughly 2 weeks after the son is shot, and that's how I got into it. I mean, if the Truth hadn't actually run the story for defamation reasons, they probably shouldn't have run it, but I just think they took a punt. And we based it on the fact that this is what Keith had told Internal Affairs. Yeah.
But Keith...
Which he might have, or maybe didn't. I don't know.
Keith also asked you to come to the morgue with him.
Keith he didn't trust, obviously, the New South Wales Police. He didn't trust the pathologist who did the original post-mortem. He wanted to get an independent pathologist, which took an awfully long time. But in the meantime, he wanted me to go to the morgue with him as an independent witness. I honestly can't remember the reasons specifically. I guess he just wanted somebody with him. Anyway, I'd never been to the morgue before. I'd never seen a dead body before. They wheel out Warren Lanfranchi on a steel gurney. He's on his back, he's naked, and they put him right up against the glass partition here. I can't remember the conversation. I don't know what we spoke about, if anything. But I do remember thinking the bullet hole that went in through his heart was incredibly small. Not having any experience with gunshots, as I think a few people here tonight might have. I remember that, it just stuck in my mind. It was like somebody had stubbed out a cigarette on his chest. And I think Keith wanted them to roll him over, but they refused. So I remembered the tiny 5-cent piece size of the wound going in. They wouldn't show us the wound going out. And also the other thing that always stuck with me was because he'd been there for a while, the sloshing of the preservative on the gurney. So that was that was my introduction to crime writing. There's an inquest at the end of
And did you cover the inquest?
No, I didn't. I went along for a few days. The inquest was controversial. There were very high-powered lawyers engaged by Sally Ann Huckstep and the Lanfranchi family. And the Lanfranchi family had made it known from day one that they believed Warren had been murdered. Keith, on the very first day, has a conversation with a police officer at the morgue saying, my son's been murdered. The cop says something like, don't say that. So there's no doubt about their view of what happened. The inquest proceeds. Neddy Smith gives evidence, but none of us know that it's Neddy Smith because he's given the letter G. He's known as G. And really, you've got to cast your mind back. To me, at least, Smith was not known. I didn't really know about Rogerson. I mean,
well, I don't think anyone did at that time.
Nobody really did, except some armed robbers. and some pretty serious criminals. I mean, Roger had worked in homicide. He'd worked in the armed hold-up squad. He was known in the CIB very well at that stage as the Golden Boy. Ned was, I didn't know who they were. I didn't know Roger, but I got to know him. Yeah.
Well, when did you come to realise that they were working together, that they had a sort of business relationship?
That was one thing that was never explored at the inquest, despite the fact that an inquest can hear hearsay evidence. And Ian Barker QC for Sally Ann Huckstep and the lawyer for the barrister for the Lanfranchi family tried to get in evidence about a lot of the relationship with Ned Smith. And I actually looked back at the transcript the other day, and the coroner said something like that. It's common knowledge that Warren was dealing heroin, and it was. There's no ifs, buts or maybes about that. And then he said, what does it matter who he's buying it off? And, well, Sally Ann Huckstep was about to say he's buying it off Ned Smith, who is G, whose name is suppressed in this inquest, and who drove Lanfranchi to his death. And as I've discovered, getting access to the transcript, but also 600 pages of witness statements, Ned has been doing some shuttle diplomacy. Well, I'm sorry, diplomacy is not the right word, to set up this meeting between Roger and Warren Lanfranchi. He's meeting at the Broadway Hotel, which is just down the road from the Officers of Truth. He's meeting Roger outside courts. He's going back to the Broadway to meet Warren. There's numerous meetings to make this happen, and on the Saturday afternoon it finally does happen. Ned Smith is intimately involved, and I think for a lot of criminals at that time, they then started to suspect that Smith was, well, suspect, because they blamed him in a way. But the relationship never came out at that time. The inquest would not hear any evidence about a whole range of things, which I think, my completely unlegal opinion, they should have, which might have disposed...
But do you think the police were trying to protect themselves during that inquest?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, one of the interesting things is that Keith Lanfranchi in that very first interview, this is like 5 months before the inquest, tells me the shots are fired 12 to 13 seconds apart. There are two witnesses who are completely impartial, completely believable, who say the shots are 12 to 13 seconds apart, which contradicts what Roger's told the Sunday Telegraph, 2 to 3 seconds, and also is a bit of a problem for Roger in that if he shot him 12 or 13 seconds apart, that's a pretty long time. And it gave rise to this theory that...
Well, especially if you're supposedly acting in self-defence.
In self-defence, yeah. So it gives rise to the, and not surprisingly, to the theory that he shot him, he's still standing, falls into the gutter, and he goes over and, in the famous scene from Blue Murder, delivers a coup de grace at close range with his police 38.
So how much longer after that did you actually come to personally meet Roger Rogerson?
Roger survives the inquest because a jury finds that he shot Lanfranchi while trying to effect an arrest. They had a number of options they could have gone for, but they sort of settled on this middle range thing. Anyway, look, he's cleared. They're all cleared. Statements are taken from everybody. He's cleared of that matter. But the controversy lingers because people are not convinced. Smith's name starts to get bandied around. He's a heroin dealer. He's close to Roger. Warren's found with the 1901 Harrington and Richardson, and for all of those us blokes who played cowboys and Indians when we were much younger, when you got your cap gun at Christmas and it broke by Boxing Day, you couldn't pull the trigger back. You had to stick your finger behind the trigger, push it forward to make it fire. It could fire one shot. So as his dad said to me, he'd be a mug to be caught with that. I mean, there was a lot of suspicion about it. The suspicion and controversy lingers. 1982, it comes up in State Parliament. John Dowd, I think he's Leader of the Opposition. It doesn't matter. He raises it in State Parliament, calling for a judicial inquiry. I ring Roger because he's previously refused interviews. When I was doing Stories for Truth, he's just told me to bugger off. So I ring him, and he's by then at Darlinghurst. This is 82, so the shooting June 81, inquest late 81, Roger's cleared, controversy continues. December 82, I phone him at Darlinghurst. At first he goes, "Why should I talk to you?" He didn't use any four-letter words, but he just made it plain that I could stick it. Hangs up. I'm sitting in the Herald Police Rounds room, and in those days, the police radio's blaring, I'm smoking, everybody's smoking. And I'm going, "Oh, mate, I said to the Chief of Staff, we haven't got the, he won't do it." 20 minutes later, landline rings. "Roger Rogerson here, Neil." Mate. Under a bit of pressure lately. I'd love to have a chat. I'm going, shit. Because it's sort of in the afternoon. We meet at Taylor Square because Darlinghurst Police Station, the old Darlinghurst Police Station, he was there. He walks up, he's wearing a safari suit. I've got the latest technology, what we used to call a beeper, known as a pager, which when the office wanted to find you would just go beep, 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 beep. And you were supposed to phone the Chief of Staff, which you did sometimes, or other times.
You'd have to find a phone box, though.
Yeah, you have to find a phone box. You had to have a pocket full of 10 and 20 cent pieces. Young people are shocked and horrified. Anyway, look, he does the interview, and he stares at me. I'm taking shorthand notes because that's what you did. You learnt shorthand when you're a cadet. My shorthand's pretty good. So I'm looking down a lot, but looking up and asking him questions about is he skimming the proceeds of armed robberies? And is he dealing in heroin? And does he own a block of flats?
You actually asked him all these things?
Yeah, because those were the allegations. And he didn't miss a beat, except every time I looked up, he had these quite piercing blue eyes, sort of Paul Newman-like, and he was just staring at me. And I think the interview went for 70 minutes. Story appears on the front page of the Herald the next day, and he phones me and says, "You've given me a fair go. If there's ever anything you want to know about, armed robberies, homicide, blah, 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 give me a call." So thanks, Roger. Good on you, mate. All good.
And so when was the last time you spoke to him?
Last time I spoke to him was after he's convicted of the murder of Jamie Gow. He's charged in 2014. He's convicted in 2016. I saw him in Long Bay in 2020.
Did you actually go into the jail?
Yeah, I went into the jail. I hadn't seen him since about 6 months before the murder of Jamie Gow, so that's 2014. And the book was not on the table then. I just thought, I've met him so many times, and look, I've been into prison to visit quite a lot of crooks, so there was no reason I shouldn't go in and visit Roger. And you never know. You're like in the big city. I saw him in, I think it was January, February 2020, just before COVID. He was pretty well. He'd been ill. The thing he said that I remember, he was convicted of the Jamie Gow murder with a former colleague, Glenn McNamara, and I remember him saying, "I was warned about McNamara. I should have listened." I thought, yeah, maybe you should have. He would not elaborate on that because he still had an appeal to the High Court. He was still hopeful he was going to get out. The only other thing I remember him saying, and this has only come back to me more or less recently, he was in there with some pedophile priests, and he said, "You know what, they've got absolutely no bloody remorse. No remorse. They're still blaming the kids." And he was clearly disgusted, and I'm sure he was right, but I don't think he ever expressed any remorse in any interview I ever did with him over between 82 and, well, up to 2020, I guess, the only remorse he ever expressed was that he got his daughters his name had blackened their name and also his wife. That was the only remorse he ever expressed. He hated what the police had done to him. He said something like, I was only ever doing what I was trained to do and what they told me to do and what they thought was effing fantastic, and all of a sudden they've shifted the goalposts.
Right. So, just going back, I'll ask you about Neddy Smith, but how did they come to fall out? Like, how did they come to have such a spectacular falling out? And what was the effect on both of their lives?
Wow. They both meet for the very first time in 1976. Neddy's doing an armed robbery. He buggers it up. He's with a bloke called Bobby Chapman, who Roger describes as the toughest criminal he'd ever met. He's a little bloke. He said he was the toughest man he'd ever met. There are shots fired during that robbery. They're trying to pinch a payroll, but they botch it. Chapman and Roger are arrested in quick time by the armed hold-up squad. Ned later says that he's arrested in this spectacular fashion by Roger in a police station while he's reporting for bail. Roger leans over him with this huge shotgun. Probably not. Roger wasn't there. But it's a much better way for the two of them to meet than in the offices of the armed hold-up squad. Roger had arrested Bobby Chapman. Other detectives had arrested Ned. And there was apparently no resistance, given there were about 8 detectives armed, and he was in a police station with other with other uniformed police who all had their 38s. So they meet in 76. They're charged with armed robbery. At some stage, and I'll cut this short because, as with everything with Roger and Ned, nothing is straightforward. Ned, it's said, dobs in Bobby Chapman as the man who's fired the shots during the robbery. Chapman says this later. Ned put me in it. Roger does a record of interview with Bobby Chapman, in which Chapman says, yes, I done it, but the shots were fired accidentally. He then refuses to sign the interview. Chapman says later, I said nothing like that. I didn't open my mouth, which is probably the truth. Goes to court. Roger gets in the box, and much to the amazement of all concerned, says to the judge, Crown prosecutor, jury, I've made some further inquiries, and it's now my view that Bobby Chapman, the man on trial here, whom I took the statement from, which I say is genuine, and in which he says I fired the shots but it was an accident, I now believe the shots were not fired by Bobby Chapman but by a man by the name of Robert McKinnon, who, conveniently for everyone, has disappeared. The evidence, the Crown prosecutor is outraged. They adjourn the trial, they take an adjournment. Crown prosecutor says, I don't believe you've got an informer. I think this is bullshit. Roger goes, no, it's not, no, blah, blah, blah. Trial is aborted, it never proceeds. Chapman gets, as a result of Roger's, whatever you want to call it,
Flip-flopping.
backflip, saying, yeah, it's a genuine record of interview in which he confessed, but now another bloke fired the shots and we can't find that bloke, and nobody's ever found him. He disappeared one day after the Fielders bakery robbery, never seen again. So,
what do you think, that they killed him?
Yeah, that's what I'm told. And that's Ned actually refers to it in his book, Neddy, and says that within a few days, police interviewed him at Cogra police station. He does a 3-page record of interview, which he signs remarkably. And I fortunately have a copy of that record of interview thanks to a good colleague of mine. It appears that nothing else ever happened about Robert McKinnon, although he was reasonably well known as a bank robber. He'd come to the attention of a teacher at the National Art School, Ron Robertson Swan, who was now quite a well-known artist and sculptor. And in those days they were trying to do some rehabilitation, so Ron Robertson Swan had been going in to see Robert McKinnon, as a part of a rehabilitation and all that sort of thing. No, McKinnon disappears, police interview, friends, family. No, go on.
How many people in your book have disappeared and have never been found?
Robert McKinnon's probably the first one. Probably the best known one to people in the crime world is Lynn Woodward, who is an associate of Lanfranchi in the sense that she's a heroin user. She's the girlfriend of one of Lanfranchi's mates, who's also a bank robber. They're robbing banks together. She disappears after giving evidence, very brief evidence, at the inquest in 1981. So McKinnon's 76, she's end of 81, and I think her final words at the inquest were, and she'd made contradictory statements, so you don't know which way it was going to go, but I think she said something like, I just want to say some other things and I just want the truth to come out. Exit, never seen again. Chris Flannery, never seen, disappeared May 9, 1985. I'm just trying to think if there's any others who've disappeared. There are a few who disappeared without trace. Brian Alexander, law clerk. I'm not saying that either Roger or Neddy did that one, but the people who crossed paths with them or were in the same orbit, and it's a pretty vicious criminal cycle. You're talking about a lot of heroin, armed robberies, and so on. But there are a significant number of people who were shot, murdered, or who just plain disappeared off the face of the earth, and no trace has ever been found of them.
So tell us about the one and only time you met Neddy Smith.
Yeah. At that stage, I was working at 60 Minutes, and I think this is late 86 or early 87. A reporter by the name of Mike Munro had joined 60 Minutes. Mike knew Ned from 85, 86. Comes to 60 Minutes. Ned's a good story. Still, we don't quite know what the story's going to be, but if we can get him on camera, could be good. So Munro lines up a lunch, and I reckon, we'll probably go to the Broadway Hotel. We'll, a few schooners of Reshes, like we had the other day, Kate at the Iron Duke. Few schooners of Reshes, a pie, blah, blah, blah. No, Ned wants to go to Prunier's in Woollahra.
Which is now Chiswick.
I've not been to Prunier's before, in fact, or since, I don't think. So Munro and I turn up. Ned comes in. He's big, but I have to say he was completely respectful. He was almost deferential. He was very softly spoken. I didn't see any sign of the Parkinson's then, so I reckon this is about January 87 or thereabouts. Didn't see any sign of the Parkinson's. And we're chatting away, and we're into the lunch drinking our Crown lagers, starched white tablecloths, Italian waiters, yes, Mr. Smith, because he'd been there before, and left huge tips, like hundreds of dollars. At which point in walks another villain, Murray Riley, who's an ex-New South Wales police officer who had been convicted of trying to import, I think it was 2 tons of marijuana on a yacht called the Anoa. Anyway, Murray's been to jail. He knows Ned. He comes over to the table, obviously recognises Munro, and is told 60 Minutes, blah, blah, blah. Ned calls him the Prince of Promises. He's always got a scheme up his sleeve, always, trying to get something for free. Anyway, our lunch proceeds. It's all going reasonably well. Ned won't commit, but we're pushing him and we're saying, what are you doing? He says, mate, I'm an invalid pensioner, bit of SP, bit of stealing, but basically an invalid pensioner, doing the best I can. And as this is going on, I'm sort of looking over at Murray Riley, and he'd come in with a retinue of younger blokes, and anybody who remembers the TV series Miami Vice, they're all dressed in pastels, like pale, no, well, it wouldn't have been pink, but greens and loafers, no socks. Loafers, no socks. Anyway, they're getting stuck into the Veuve Clicquot and waving. What's going on over there? They're having a good time. About 4 o'clock or whenever it was, and it wasn't a particularly boozy lunch with Ned at all. And as I say, he was incredibly respectful. I go to get the bill. I've got the 60 minutes Amex, as does Munro, of course. I look at the bill. It's over $1,000. That's 11 or 1200. And I spoke to Mike Munro earlier this year.
And that's in like the 80s?
That's in 1987.
Right.
And I've been at 60 Minutes a few years, but I know how Gerald Stone, the executive producer, is going to react when I come back to the office with not having got the interview, with a bill for, say, $1,000. And I said to Ned, mate, we just can't pay this. And he's going, oh, Jesus Christ. Reaches into his pocket. Huge mitt comes out, huge wad of $50 notes. Peels off about 500 or 600, says, there you go. Jeez, and looks over at Riley, swears at him. And I said, oh, thanks, Ned, that's great, thanks very much. He then drives off in a brand new Mercedes. And I think I said to Munro, that's some invalid and some pension. But he was, look, that was the only time I had any meaningful time with him. I think I spoke to him once or twice after that. But no, he was...
And was he on bail then for the murder of Ronnie Flavelle?
No, that happened a few months after our lunch.
Right.
When he went to another lunch with
Roger.
So this is towards I think it's October 87. He goes to lunch. They're drinking at the Covent Garden Hotel, which was one of the many pubs Ned used to drink in, and they used to drink, as one of Ned's associates later described it, quote, gargantuan amounts of alcohol, unquote. And they did this day. So Ned and a mate, we'll leave him out for the moment. They leave Roger behind. Ned and his mate decide it's a great idea, having knocked off 30 middies and a bottle of wine or whatever, to drive to Coogee to carry on. How they actually got to Coogee, nobody knows, but they did. They stop in the middle of Coogee Bay Road outside a fish shop. Fate, call it what you will, a tow truck pulls up behind them, 2 blokes in it. The driver flashes the lights. Ned and his mate get out. A brawl follows. I'm cutting this short, but the passenger in the tow truck is stabbed, a bloke called Ronnie Flavelle. He's a Kiwi. Ronnie and his mate might have been at the pub about the same time as Ned, but that sort of is brushed aside. But he's stabbed to death and he dies on the footpath. Ned's charged with the murder. He gets bail because it's happened at night time. People have been drinking. The eyewitnesses have been in a restaurant. They're reasonably sober, but it's dark. It's happened very quickly. I actually think, I've got to say, I think Smith was not unlucky, but he perhaps, I can't say he shouldn't have been convicted because he's there with his mate and the guy dies. He's stabbed. There's no question about any of that. Ned is there. But I think the New South Wales police officer involved and the key witness, the tow truck driver. The tow truck driver's evidence got progressively better for the police over 3 interviews. I'm not saying Ned didn't deserve to go to jail, but...
Did Roger try to interfere at all on his behalf?
Sorry?
Did Roger try to interfere on his behalf during that, or
no,
had they already started to fall out?
No, I don't think they'd started to fall out. They'd been drinking that day. Roger is, by this time, this is 87, Roger's last day of active service is 1984. That's his last day of active service. He's officially kicked out in, I think, April 1986. So by this time, he's well and truly out. He still has all the connections though, and I think it's fair to say that even though by that stage he was pretty much on the outer with most people in the police force, he still maintained contacts. You know, old loyalties die hard, but you know, he'd been found not guilty of various crimes, the attempted bribery of Michael Drury, stemming from 1984, the attempted murder of Michael Drury, he's found not guilty of that. So, you know, Roger's still running around. I think he actually phoned Ned on the morning after the stabbing of Ronnie Flavel in Coogee Bay Road and said, you know, you're in deep shit. And yeah, Smith gets bail, 87. He then decides to rob the Botany Council of its Christmas payroll the following year.
While he's on bail.
While he's on bail.
As you do.
As you do. And he's caught red-handed by the armed hold-up squad and various detectives. And Ned says it's a set-up, but he's actually outside Botany Council in the back of I think it's a van. And there he's got guns, you know. They've got him banged to rights, Kate. I think he might have even pleaded guilty. He was with a guy called Glenn Flack. And I think Flack pleaded guilty. He got something like maybe 12 years on the top, not sure. So, but that's his last day of freedom at the end of 88. He never gets out of jail. But Roger maintains correspondence with him. He writes to him in jail, particularly when he thinks Ned's about to maybe roll over, because Ned does have a chance of getting out. He got life for the murder of Flavel, but life didn't mean life. That was before truth in sentencing. So he was potentially looking at, and lawyers here will know much better than me, but maybe, 12, 15 years. He had a chance of getting out. So at one stage he goes to the ICAC, I think it's about 91, because he knows he wants to get out, fair enough.
So he's going to throw anyone under a bus?
Including Roger.
Including Roger.
Although, somewhat bizarrely, in the opening address at the ICAC, they say that Smith has refused to identify one detective. He's named about 50 others. There's one name missing. It's somebody called Alan. Ned refuses to name him. Counsel assisting Barry Toomey says, we're going to say that this Alan is Roger, which sort of stood out like the proverbial dunny in the desert, because there's 50 other cops named there, but Roger's name isn't in there. You know, and that's when Roger's still writing to him. He sends him a letter. I've heard all sorts of terrible rumours. You know, the police force is full of rumours. The gossip is shocking. Anyway, I hope you're going well. Look on the bright side. When you get out, maybe you could get a job in the armed hold-up squad typing up unsigned records of interview.
No.
Yeah, it's tendered in evidence. So I'm not making this up. Regards, Roger, you know. But then it sort of turns and, you know, Ned's doing his best, and he makes allegations of widespread corruption, not just about Rogerson, but about the armed hold-up squad, a lot of detectives, and there's the ICAC inquiry, which reports in 1994. There's a lot of stuff happening in between. That's the problem with these two is there's nothing straightforward. There is trying to draw a straight line is impossible, and trying to get to the truth a lot of the time is, it's just elusive.
What is the most significant thing that you discovered while doing the book? Was there one thing that you thought, I never knew that?
Yes, there's one thing, and it relates not to land. Well, there was a bit about land franchi, but I think that was predictable. It wasn't the shooting of Butchie Burns in 78, which we haven't touched on. It was a shooting in 1976 of an armed robber by the name of Philip Weston, who was an armed robber. Weston was a Kiwi. He was involved in a serious jail riot while he was incarcerated in New Zealand. They burnt down the jail. Weston's wife, Catherine, allegedly smuggled in a gun to help him get out, a revolver. He eventually pleads insanity and the court quashes his convictions. Anyway, he comes to Sydney.
Perfect.
Robs a bank, December 29, 1975. The ANZ at Randwick? It might have been Bank of New South Wales. I don't know. I can't remember. It's in the book. But they rob it of $89,000. Weston's with 3 others. The armed hold-up squad is onto them within hours. And I've got the original police diaries of one of the officers involved in that arrest. And they knew within 24 hours. The names are written in his diary. They didn't have Weston's name, they had an alias. Roger arrests not Philip Weston, but one of the accomplices. Long story short, Weston and the 4 of them are charged with the armed robbery. 89 grand. As it turns out, Weston robbed the same bank a year earlier, so the total is about 165, which in 1976, 75, 76 is a tidy amount. Weston applies for bail almost from day one, and he's got some pretty good legal representation. He keeps on applying. He keeps on getting knocked back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The armed hold-up squad, including one of the detectives who arrests Weston and the others, said no, incredibly dangerous. Found him with a whole pile of guns, false passports, blah, blah, blah. Should not get bail. Bail refused, bail refused. Roger gets into the box. About, don't hold me to it, bail application number 5 or 6. There's 8, I think, in all. And the tone just changes. Philip Weston, I think it's fair to say, Your Honour, is the black sheep of the family. His wife and his mother, Alice Blossom Weston, are people of the highest calibre. His wife, Catherine, I've met. I've been to the apartment at Manly, where she is living with her 2 children and with her mum. And, you know, Alice Blossom Weston has been the victim of 2 confidence tricksters, Kate, who have taken a lot of her money, and she needs her son, Philip, to run her financial affairs with his 165 grand, I guess. Anyway, Roger's playing, this is my opinion now, having read all the bail applications. Roger is playing the long game. He doesn't get bail that day, but they then go, well, there's 3 co-accused. One of them gets bail, second one gets bail, third one gets bail, leaves Philip Weston. The cops that have been opposing it, one goes on annual leave, the other one goes on a cruise on a Russian liner to the South Pacific. He's the guy that's arrested Weston at gunpoint, Ian Worley, Detective Ian Worley, and he's a mate of Roger's. He jumps on the cruise ship on the Monday, Tuesday, another bail application. Roger doesn't give evidence. His very, very good friend gives evidence and says, I know nothing about Philip Weston. I know nothing of his antecedents, except to say he's dangerous. Will he report on bail? Well, you know, most people do, sort of thing. I can't really say one way or the other. Denies any knowledge of Philip Weston, really. Weston gets bail. Reports a few times at Paddington Police Station, then bang, he's off, as the other blokes in the squad had predicted. He then tries to rob a bank at Westfield, Parramatta, and shoots dead a 40-year-old bank manager who has a wife and 2 kids, who I think were then like 8 and 10. That very night, and having gone through all the documents, Roger's best mate puts in this report to the head of the CIB saying, Weston will kill any member of the armed hold-up squad that he can. He should not be approached by any other police. He is highly dangerous. He hates us. He's likely done this shooting with his mother, Alice Blossom Weston, who just 2 weeks earlier Roger had said was of the highest integrity. There's a huge manhunt. This is a huge story in the papers. Weston's on the front page of the Mirror, the Sun, the Herald, everything. A couple of weeks later, they find him. He's up at Avoca in a beach shack. He's on the beach. They surround it. There's planning at the CIB. Roger is intimately involved in all this. There's like 30 cops, bulletproof vests, there's tear gas, etc. It's a full-on siege. Weston refuses to come out and gives some of the police a character reference, and probably fires a couple of shots. It appears that shots were fired. He then tries to escape, or I don't know what he's doing, but he goes to a bathroom window, which is probably where I'm sitting. There's 3 New South Wales police with shotguns there. He sticks his head out the window with his shotgun, makes a few choice remarks about their parentage and other things, and is shot dead. And, yeah.
And because I think the plan was that if an arrest was effected, Roger was going to drive him back to
Yes.
Sydney.
If he's not shot dead. And personally, I don't think there's anything corrupt or anything about the shooting of Weston. I don't think. Well, sorry, no. The corruption is the bail process.
Yeah.
The corruption is the
But
bail
also,
process.
hadn't Roger taken money from him?
This is what I find out after reading. There's an inquiry into the whole matter, run by a member of the Public Service Board. You can imagine what the armed hold-up squad thought of that. This is striking terror into the hearts. No offence to the Public Service Board, but there's an inquiry. The thing about that was that Rogerson and the other members of the armed hold-up squad gave evidence and were cross-examined reasonably vigorously by somebody from the Attorney General's department, because Weston's release, when he finally gets bail, is blamed on a soft judiciary. You know, the judge is an idiot, right? The inquiry into Weston's bail starts to paint a bit of a different picture when I discovered the transcript of the inquiry at State Archives. And there's mention of a newspaper called Militant, which was a small communist newspaper. That newspaper made, and I didn't know any of this, of course, somebody says, you need to go to the National Library and get copies of Militant. And there I find, and I think it's the first significant or first ever reference to Rogerson and corruption. The Militant says Rogerson's been paid. I think they might have mentioned 50,000. There are people in jail who know about it, his co-accused know about it. So anyway, I read all this and I noticed that amidst all this, the detective who had originally arrested Philip Weston and who had gone on the Russian cruise liner, who obviously wasn't there when he got out, had been sort of kicked out of the armed hold-up squad. And I thought, I wonder if he's still alive. And I wrote him a letter, as you do. And he got back to me, this is last year. He rang me, I don't know, from Barrow, and I said, Ian Worley was his name. He was the person who was friendly with Roger and who had arrested Philip Weston in, fairly violent circumstance. I said to Ian, I'm writing this book, do you know anything or remember anything about the Philip Weston case? And he said, sort of, do I what? And he said, Roger, men died because of what Roger did. Come and see me, I'll tell you the whole rotten story. I don't want to talk over the phone.
How old was he?
86. And so I go to see him. He's kept the entire police brief, including his diaries, surveillance photos. And he says, I was told at the time that Roger had taken a $50,000 bribe. And I haven't mentioned, the wife of Philip Weston, Catherine, because his family needs him. Roger visits the wife in Manly. This is obviously before he gets out. Gives evidence to that effect in the court. It turns out that the wife that Roger says is there with the children is not his wife. She's an imposter. She's a ring-in. Weston's real wife is in New Zealand. The woman has turned up an hour before Rogerson knocks on the door and leaves 10 minutes after he leaves. They've used somebody who we still don't know to represent herself as the wife in a bid to get Weston bail. Because if you've got a wife and kids, a judge will take a better view, not necessarily give you bail, but will take a better view about. So Rogers, in my opinion, orchestrated the fake wife, the ring-in. Then, of course, he has to get bail, Weston. Bail's granted, but it doesn't happen just like that. You don't just walk out of court. Somebody has to go and put up money. 2 people turn up at Waverley Court. The man's name is Ali Barber. Seriously, and apparently that is his real name. But he's with a woman, Mrs. Barber, and they're putting up their house in Strathfield or wherever it was. But they both need to sign it because they both own it. Mrs. Barber doesn't say anything, possibly because she's another ring-in. And Mr. Barber's real wife is not at Waverley Court, she's actually in Finland. I mean, there's this whole series of events that, in my opinion, that I discovered that I just went, wow, he has manipulated the system and played the long game. Months we're talking about. Months.
Years.
Months. Well, on the Western case. So yeah, that was something that I found out that I just went, oh, wow.
And so I think on the note of playing the long game, I think it's time to ask. I think it's time to, if anyone here has any questions that they'd like to ask Neil. One last question while people are thinking, what did he ever do with the money?
Oh, God. Got any easier questions?
Okay.
One of the things was, and one of the reasons he, I think, got off some of the charges was time after time, character evidence was brought in, and neighbours spoke incredibly highly of Roger, and genuinely so. But Roger's barrister made much of the fact that he lived in a modest fibro cottage, and had all his life. And as I say in the book, in a city obsessed with valuable real estate, I don't think a modest fibro cottage has ever been quite so valuable, because it was like, well, if he's got all this money, what's he done with it? He's living in a modest fibro cottage. He's wearing a cardigan. I mean, anyway, there we go.
Yes, we've got a question up the back.
Researching Roger, getting to know this story, what do you feel like has brought you back time and time again? This will be your second.
I'm sorry, that young lady over there, who I might know.
You've
So,
spent a huge chunk of your career on Roger, his story,
Yep.
who he associates with. What do you feel like has drawn you back time and time again to keep Roger there?
I guess because it's a compelling story, he's a compelling character. He is at the centre of an era that is hard to imagine. He's mixed up with Ned, who is also a person, who's larger than life. It's just a compelling story, and the rumours went on, and the allegations went on. He's acquitted of that, he gets convicted of having $110,000 in false bank accounts. He's then acquitted of perjury at I think it's the Police Integrity Commission, which in Roger's scheme of Roger's life is not much. He was charming, he was highly intelligent. I know as a detective he was courageous. He also, and this comes back a little bit to the Western stuff, I think you can almost draw a line between Western in 76 and Jamie Gow in 2014 in terms of the planning and manipulation. The Jamie Gow thing, murder, was actually set in train quite a long time before it, and there's some people in here that know a lot more about that than me, but it was the same with the Western thing, if you accept my premise. And, you know, you can see he's playing the long game with Western to get him out on bail, to get his 50 grand. He would, of course, deny all of this, and in terms of hard evidence, I don't have any, but the transcript of the inquiry, the bail hearings, the court case, and the evidence of Roger's old workmate that the bribes were being paid. Weston's mum was running around handing out envelopes with $4,000, $5,000. That, you know, I think it was a compelling story in the end, and a lot of it.
Well, why did he slip up in the Gow matter? Like, he'd lost his touch a bit.
He's arrested for the murder of Jamie Gow in the storage unit, along with his another former New South Wales detective, Glenn McNamara. As it turns out, just months before, at the end of 2014, he's giving evidence in a civil case, and he's the usual cocky Roger. He's in the witness box saying, "Oh no, I've never committed criminal offences," and then he says something like, "And you know, I wouldn't do it now. I'm getting too old. If I did it now, I'd probably get caught." A few months later, he is caught in the Gow matter.
But do you think modern technology had caught up with him? With CCTV footage and things like that?
That obviously didn't exist in his day, but he'd previously been caught on CCTV, and he had not lost his marbles. I think it's hubris. I'm still the smartest bloke in the room, and I can still outsmart all the other New South Wales detectives that have come after me. He was a bit wrong on that. by a long, long way. But look, it's almost inexplicable to me and anybody that knew him that a person of such ability could end up doing that in such a blatant fashion. I mean, it still had to be all pulled together. But yeah, he was caught.
We've got another question. Right, the man up the back with his hand.
I understand that you've got to have a certain degree of hypothesis when you give accounts of what's happened. But if you take the hypothesis of Lanfranchi meeting with Neddy Smith, and Neddy Smith is driven in there, and the hypothesis is that there's a drug deal and Lanfranchi's ripped off Neddy Smith. Why would Roger so sure?
Look, I think it's.
Can you repeat the question briefly?
Yeah,
I think the question was, why would Roger Rogerson shoot Warren Lanfranchi in such a public place and in the manner he did?
It was in a back lane, and it was semi-public, but I do think, you know, that Lanfranchi gets out of jail at the end of 1980. He's sent there for stealing cars, colour televisions and VCRs. He gets 5.5 years, which is a pretty serious lagging. He meets not just Neddy Smith, but other criminals like Eric Honeysett, who is a fairly serious man. He gets out, he's dealing some heroin with Ned. I know Keith Lanfranchi thought that by Warren quite separately doing bank robberies, getting involved in a murder and an attempted murder, that he had become a liability. He was way out of line. If he'd stuck with Ned and the heroin business, maybe he would have survived. But he was becoming a liability to both Ned Smith and Roger, because he was a suspect in a murder. He's wanted for armed robberies, and there's no doubt about that. He's identified by civilian independent witnesses.
Yeah, but why would Roger shoot him?
Because Roger.
And why would the Frenchie get in the car with Eddie Smith if he's the one who's ripped off?
No, I don't think he ripped off. No, he ripped off a drug dealer called Ewan Cameron.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said it was
No, sorry, I may have confused you. I've probably confused myself. About 3 weeks before he's shot dead, he allegedly rips off one of Roger's dealers by the name of Ewan Cameron. We'll never know the truth about that because Ewan Cameron is never called to the inquest, so we just don't know. But he's Warren's wild. He's doing things that could bring, if you accept that Ned and Roger are like this, and there's a corrupt relationship, Warren Lanfranchi being arrested by other police for armed robbery or murder, he could just go, well, I've got something to tell you, you know. So it potentially is a liability for both.
I think, this woman here.
I had my own frightening encounter with Roger Rogerson in 1990. I was a young woman. It relates to the fibro footage, actually. I didn't want to tell you the story, but it was just, I wondered, was there a point in his career that you could see that he was a straight cop and then he changed to being a corrupt cop? Was there a point that you could see with your research that happened?
I think I thought originally that it started around the time he met Ned Smith, because Ned's dealing in heroin, there are huge amounts of money. Having looked at the Philip Weston case, which is prior to that, look, he was a product of his times, and he joins in 58. A lot of the people who are his seniors have come out of World War II. It's a tough game, particularly armed robbery. There are guys running around with shotguns. I don't want to... I think people should remember there are a lot of guys running around with shotguns and occasionally murdering bank tellers. And the armed hold-up squad in those days just met force with overwhelming force. I'm not excusing what happened, but there's a bit of a context that sometimes is difficult to explain. Where it started with Roger, well, it's got to be the 70s, but where he really crossed the line, I guess it's with... Well, he's crossed the line with Weston. That's an extraordinary thing to do, and it's resulted in the murder of, in my opinion, of a completely innocent bank manager.
One last question. I think that... oh, sorry. Yes?
Neil, when they make the movie Blue Murder 2, and it's the Redux version, will you be the scriptwriter?
I don't know. Blue Murder was fantastic, I've got to say. I mean, it's a testament to the power of that program that people remember a number of the scenes, and in some ways a number of those scenes have become real as a fact, whereas in fact it's drama, and some of them are real for sure, and it's fantastic. Richard Roxburgh, wow, he was fabulous. I would love to do the movie version.
And what part would you play, Neil?
The ageing reporter.
One last question.
Just about the Jamie Gow murder.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Brian Alexander earlier, the early Cooker man.
Yes.
Yes. Why was Roger, in disposing of the body, as you say, smart, canny, all the rest of it? Why did he dispose of Jamie Gow's body so badly, and why, you know, and that's floated to the surface when he knew how to dispose of the body? Why did he allow himself to?
At that stage, and Roger had a bad hip, he had a bad shoulder, I think he had arthritis, and I know he had gout, and he's with Glenn McNamara, who's portly. They can barely lift the body out of the storage unit into the car. I just think they're just old. They didn't know what they were doing. Russell.
Just as an
said tonight, I heard around the corner.
Russell, I think you need to come up here and you need to...
Come on.
It's very rare that we have a first-hand account here. And everyone, this is Russell Oxford.
Long-time homicide
You
squad.
take my spot.
And the officer in charge who arrested Roger for the murder of Jamie Gow.
I didn't expect this. I was just listening to the questions that came out, and around the corner you said, why did they have to kill him, Jamie Gow? The reason we believe he had to kill him because, and it goes back to Kate's point when she said he got caught out. This was planned, this was well executed, this murder was planned months in advance. So I often said at the time when we investigated, why did he have to kill him? Why didn't they just turn up and rip the drugs off him? Don't you know who we are? And just rip the drugs and go. But he had to kill Jamie Gow because the Chinese triads were involved in this from Hong Kong. They brought the drugs in at the request of Glenn McNamara. Glenn McNamara sought 10 kilos of drugs. The Hong Kong triads said, we don't know who this McNamara guy is, we'll give you 3 instead. So they've imported 3 kilos into the thing. So this was months in advance. They bought a car in a bodgy name from the street in Mount Druitt, a station wagon which is purpose-built to carry a body weight. McNamara takes his boat out from his house the day before and conveniently they put the body into the boat. But the question that I said to the guys at the time, why did they need to kill this kid? Now, well, what's the connection? A 20-year-old student. And McNamara came into the brief from day one. Roger was always on the periphery. We didn't realise he came into it until we spotted him driving his car into the rental space the day before to take a couple of office chairs out. Now, the reason he took the chairs out was to give them room so they could do the murder in a cramped office space. Anyway, I could see you and talk to you for hours about this murder.
But Russell, just one point there, and you've alluded to this. The car that eventually disposes of the body of Jamie Gow is organised by Roger, who, as you say, at that stage is completely in the background, and it's done months before via one of his old organised crime contacts, Carl Bonnet. And it's just, so there's that,
we find a newspaper,
the Hawkesbury Gazette.
The Hawkesbury Gazette.
That's it.
And we find that in the car as well. But
the link being that Carl Bonnet lives near Richmond or thereabouts, and his local paper is the Hawkesbury Gazette, and it's found in the car that he's bought in a bodgy name.
And I think the overriding thing with this, people say, how stupid were they got caught on camera? But we're giving them credit as if we're giving them a lead pass, you got away with it, you idiots, because you didn't have the camera there, but that's not the case at all. This was brazen arrogance on their part. Brazen arrogance on their part. They knew the cameras were there. And they proceeded to do this. And the thing is that everything was going to plan. Unfortunately, we got into it early when we got the vision of the CCTV carrying the dead body out. So we were a couple of days behind, and all of a sudden we got in control.
And they didn't pay you enough money.
Sorry?
It's a joke.
I didn't hear that, sorry. But at least to the point was that the body was weighed down with an anchor of some sort and had a very thick chain. But when the body was dumped at sea, the chain broke. It was just luck on our part that the body surfaced.
If it hadn't surfaced, would they be convicted?
Probably not. Probably not, because we... And the reason why Jamie had to be killed, again, because the triads sent their investigators out to Sydney, and of course Roger would have to answer to them, it wasn't us, it was your man ripped it off. Jamie Gow's got the drugs, he's disappeared, that's why he had to disappear.
Right, yeah.
Right, so you understand, it wasn't a case that they could simply just rob him and move on. He had to go because the triads came out with their investigation team, and of course they confronted Roger and McNamara. It wasn't us. Jamie Gow's got your drugs. He's got your money as well.
Yeah, he's done the runner.
He's done the runner.
Yeah, gone.
As I said, this was a meticulously well-planned murder. And it was 6 of the most exciting days of my life.
Good on you, mate.
And I was lucky that I had a big team of detectives working on it. But
Who made the chain?
but I'll finish the story off. And I met Roger Rogerson in 1982 at Darlinghurst. Where's Martha? I can see Martha in the crowd there, and John Laycock. I was a young uniformed constable working at Darlinghurst this time, and Roger Rogerson walked in and said, Detective Sergeant, and I was introduced. They said, son, this is Detective Sergeant Roger Rogerson. Hello, sir, nice to meet you. And as you said, it was an era in the early 80s, this famous detective.
Yeah.
So I then go to 2014, where we're in the middle of this investigation. I end up in Brisbane because after the murder, Roger took off to Brisbane he's on the speaking circuit. So he went up to Brisbane. So two of us flew up to Brisbane to try and, the manhunt was on to try and find him. Because we just pinched McNamara, so we're on the hunt for Roger up in Brisbane. Roger got wind of it because he saw on the TV that McNamara had been arrested. So he left where he was, grabbed a car and drove through the night back to Sydney. So we hopped on the plane and come back the next morning. So we drove straight to, that's right, we get a phone call from his lawyer. He said, listen, Roger wants to come in and talk to me. He wants to surrender. So we said, listen, we get in at 11:30. How about we meet at Surrey Hills Police Station at 12? So we hang the phone up from the lawyer and we get on the plane. So the phone's off. When we land, our phone goes into meltdown. Roger's been arrested on national television. Because what had happened, the lawyer had done interviews with Ray Hadley, and on the he wanted Roger given a green light escort to the police station, treated him like some type of hero. And my boss at the time said, no, bullshit, we're going to lock him up. So they sent a team of our blokes went out and locked him up. So I go out to Bankstown Police Station, and as I walk into the charge room, here's Roger sitting in the dock. And I walked over, and bearing in mind I met him in 1982, right? So I walked over to him, and as I approached him, he said, hi Russ, how are you going, mate? And I said, hello Mr. Rogerson, how are you? I said, listen mate, how do you know me? I said, look, I met you in 1982. He said, I know all about you, mate. He said, I know the cases you worked on. He said, I've followed your career, I know a lot about you. He said, I'm not going to say anything about this brief. And I said, doesn't matter, Roger, you fucked. Just be recorded.
Yes, but what did he say then?
And I said, mate, you fucked. I said, we got you. And he goes, okay. And then he just sat around and he talked and someone mentioned charismatic personality. Martha, I heard you say a charismatic personality. This man he could talk the leg off a pot. He held court and he would talk. And he sat in the dock with me for the next hour, just wanting to talk and trying to get behind me to try and see if he could talk his way out of it.
And Russell, is my memory right that at one stage during the lengthy court process, during the break-in proceedings, you were talking to him or you were near the witness box and he said something like, after this is all over?
Yeah, it was a conversation. It may not be that location, but I'll give you a bit of literary licence in your book. Yeah, it was. In actual fact, where that conversation took place was jail. Because Neddy Smith was in jail at the time, and John Laycock's in the room. John Laycock locked up Neddy Smith for a number of murders over the years, so big acknowledge you, John. So I get a phone call from the Western Australian Police. And they're looking at an unsolved murder of a lady called Shirley Finn in Western Australia. She's a brothel keeper.
1975.
1975, yeah. So the Western Australian ring me and I take them out to the jail to facilitate interviews with Roger and Neddy Smith. So Neddy comes out in his walking frame, and I kid you, he did an interview, but you couldn't hear him talk. He was very softly spoken. And I remember him saying, I'm not going to admit to anything, but I'll talk to you guys. So they did a taped interview with him, and we're all sitting there like this trying to hear him. And then in walks Roger, so we organised to interview Roger. And of course he was over there at the time. Both of them were over in Western Australia at the time. That's why they were suspected of being involved in this murder. So it was during that conversation that Roger said to me, he said, listen mate, he said, I see they've got the gay Mardi Gras here in Sydney still. He said, I see the Courthouse Hotel. He said, mate, he said, I might beat this murder. He said, I'm going to buy you a beer at the Courthouse Hotel. Anyway, at the end of that story is after we convicted Roger, I went across to the Courthouse Hotel with Chris Maxwell, who was our crown. We bought a bottle of champagne.
Put it on Channel 9's bill.
We had 3 glasses. He said, who's the third one for? I said, that's for Roger.
Fantastic. Well done, mate. Fantastic.
I think that, I've got to say, I've had a lot to do with Neil over the years as a journalist, and he's covered a lot of cases that I've been involved in, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book. Neil, I really.
Thanks, mate. Thanks, Brad. Cheers, mate.
Well, that was a marvellous added bonus, and the book is fabulous. So beat your path out there and get Neil to sign it. Well done, Neil. Congratulations.